Hi, everyone. We'll begin in just 1 minute. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, The Unique Challenges and Solutions for Replacing a Live Legacy System. A little housekeeping before we begin. If at any point you have any questions about the content of this webinar or general support issues on displaying or hearing the presentation, please use the Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen. Today's speakers include Pooja Akshikar from LG Electronics, as well as Ann Mooney and Thayer Tate from SOLTECH. Pooja has been with LG Electronics North America for over 6 years. Having started on the marketing team, she is now a system solution architect under the LG Air Conditioning Technologies division. Ann Mooney is a client success lead for SOLTECH, working together with Thayer Tate, our VP of Software Solutions, to help bring client ideas to life. And with that, I will now turn it over to Ann.
Thanks, Gina. Thanks again, Pooja, for joining us on this webinar. We appreciate having you here. So I wanted to discuss first. Oh, you're welcome. I wanted to first go over our agenda. In this webinar, we're going to talk about the inspiration for this webinar. We're going to talk about the LG project mission. We're then going to really talk about some unique challenges of replacing a live system and review the technical challenges along with some non-technical challenges as well. We're then going to speak about some LG specifics towards the project and also the results of the migration of the legacy system. So Pooja, if you could do me a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at LG and why you chose SOLTECH.
Sure. I'm Pooja Akshikar, and I'm the System Solution Architect for LG Air Conditioning Technologies. LG Air Conditioning Technologies is a B2B business unit within LG, and we basically have all kinds of commercial and residential air conditioning solutions for our distributors and our applied rep engineers. We came to SOLTECH because we had a lot of data lying in different places, and we were launching or consolidating all this data for our web relaunch to lghvac.com. And this was a huge challenge in its own right. So SOLTECH actually helped us with this challenge.
Thanks, Pooja. That's great. So the inspiration for this webinar was first doing the work with LG and transitioning to their website and helping some of our other customers. But we also are asked continually by our customers is how do we update and replace legacy systems while maintaining a live database? And really, we like to help our customers understate and anticipate challenges. We like to plan better and make sure that the process goes smoothly, and also to mitigate risk. So with that, I'd like to introduce Thayer Tate, who's going to speak briefly or speak about the LG project and all that went into this migration.
Thank you, Ann. So certainly we want to capitalize on some of the specific experiences that LG had, and I'm so thankful that we've got Pooja on the line here to help with this. She actually brokered a lot of communications inside and really brought the team together within LG. And as you'll hear today, there's a lot more to it than just the technical side. So I think she brings great perspective. Some of the specific features of LG's legacy system replacement. One, it was 100% total replacement, so it wasn't kind of partial. We needed to move not only content, but actually replace the full content management system. Along with that was going to be new product branding, a totally new look and feel, not just a technical replacement. The LG site is more than a website. It is a web application. There were member areas, which means we had to migrate user membership and features and functionality. There was certainly a lot of content to move as LG's primary source of information, both for customers looking to learn more about the products, but also a significant partner network that LG has with engineers and applied reps and distributors. And for that reason, there was a significant product documentation in the form of documents and web content, about 1,500 documents, in fact, over about 10 different formats that need to be migrated. And as with many enterprise applications, the LG also has system integration, so it's not just a single app or site, but how do we handle the fact that there are these kind of fingers out into other integrations that need to be dealt with. And then because there was a significant change in product branding and even kind of the organization of product data on the website, we also knew that during the technical move and migration and building a new application, we needed to give plenty of time to the marketing and sales team because there was going to be a lot of content changes and lots of reviews. So this had a system that was both being technically upgraded, but also having significant content changing kind of go along in parallel. Now, understanding that the LG use case is very helpful, but there really are a lot of technical challenges that we see across all of our different customers that go through a legacy migration. So this webinar has been kind of designed to cover all of the major topics, and just LG was such a wonderful case study because it really does really tap into all 5 of these. But the things that we're going to talk a little bit about today are data migration challenges, dealing with a migration when you have third-party interfaces involved, the unique challenges of content migration when you have a web application that has significant web content as well or document content, what it means to migrate users from a legacy system to the new app, as well as the deployment issues. Really, what do you have to do to get prepared for that big go-live date? Before we jump into each of those specific topics, just to kind of give a little bit of a visual to the LG scenario that Pooja will be sharing some experiences along the way, we had kind of on the left-hand side, there was HTML content that needed to come over, but that's not really just a copy and paste from website 1 to 2. That also included injecting that into a new content management system as it was replacing an older proprietary content management system. There were files that needed to come over, also not really a copy and paste scenario because the files need to be searchable and thus it need to be loaded into a search index and tested through a new search engine. There's always, with any application, there's usually going to be a database behind the scenes, and certain portions of that legacy data will need to migrate over for things like lookup tables, but also true data, old historical transactions. So certainly there was some database content as well. And then users, logins, and profiles, because we certainly want to pull over any data we can about users and avoid disruption during a go-live. On the integration side, in the LG scenario, there was a significant investment in a CRM enterprise platform that had a direct connection to the website with live content feeds. And there was also a third-party component that actually injected HTML live into the website without going through the LG system. So we're going to jump in a little bit into each one of those topics and talk a little bit about some of the kind of challenges that we see across both LG and other clients that we have had. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the best practices and things that you can do to either mitigate or resolve these types of challenges with some specific feedback with Pooja along the way. So jumping into data migration, one thing we run across a lot is what I'd call mismatched data, which means that the data in the legacy application that we want to pull over simply does not map directly into the new application data structure. For example, you could have data in the legacy application that's spread over 3 tables, but in the new application needs to aggregate into 1. You can find that there could be a field in a legacy database that has 18 characters allowed, but in the new data structure there's only 15. So these are challenges that you can kind of often miss and not foresee that can hit you once you kind of go into your migration. Certainly the production data is changing live while we're moving through the migration. and data quality can be a huge issue that really has nothing to do with the technical migration, but many times you need to resolve some data quality problems that are either breaking a migration or just you simply don't want to carry over bad data into your new system. Data volumes for larger enterprises can be a huge issue, just the amount of time it takes to move data and transform it. It might even be too much to do even over a weekend deployment. So you have to be careful about data volumes. And then, of course, in agile environments that we're often in today, while you're trying to do your data migration, your dev team could be constantly shifting your new data model. You need to be prepared for those realities. The last, we'll talk a little bit about performing QA on data. We often find that the QA resources that test functional applications are not able to easily do data quality validations. So to talk a little bit about some of the best practices that can help mitigate or address those issues. One is we highly recommend that you perform data maps prior to development. Too often data migration is kind of lower on the implementation list with the idea that you want to have your stable data models in place, but then often you find out that you've underassessed what the effort's going to be. So performing those data maps early will be very helpful. For number two, we highly recommend automating and scripting the data migration. Sometimes, particularly for smaller migrations, it's assumed that it might be easier just to export the data or write a quick SQL script, and then you find that you end up having to change it or fix it or solve data quality issues, and you could have saved a lot of time by just scripting it in the first place. So usually automating those data migrations is going to be a big advantage. For larger or more complex or certainly continuous types of data integrations, an integration tool can really help automate that and also make the data migrations quicker and easier to build. There are several tools out there. Many have license fees, but there are some free tools. We also recommend, at a minimum, migrating your lookup or seed data at the beginning of development. Seed data is often what is needed for the app to operate. So, for example, if you need to have a drop-down list of states or maybe some tax codes or something like that, it's much better to do that work up front, and you may have that data in your legacy system or can get it from another source. Assess your data quality early and develop a remediation plan. When you find data quality issues at the end of the project, they're very painful because they may require manual resolutions, and you just don't have the time to get it done well. So the sooner you can identify the data quality issues, the better chance you can plan ahead to solve them. And then getting a business subject matter expert to help with that data quality is really huge. For more complex integrations, you might consider more of a side-by-side testing as opposed to a one-time migration. Pooja, I know that LG had a lot of data and content to migrate. On your end, when you moved the data from the legacy system to the new system, how did you guys handle validating that successful content migration?
I think the key strategy we had was to understand our data really well. I totally agree with you when you say get a business subject matter expert, because we had a team of super users who helped us test our data, not only in QA but also in production, which was key because they have a lot of insight to this data used in business, in actual business, really.
Yeah, thanks for that. In fact, I think that's kind of our little tip on the left there, is just to you should really view data migration as not just a technical task. It's really equally owned, in our experience, by technical and business teams. Is the best way to go about it. So kind of moving on to kind of the next challenge area, which are third-party integrations. One of the challenges is, of course, that you've got your live integration with your legacy app while you're also needing to test it out with your new app. Sometimes you can find you connected, everything looks right, but then that integration is breaking, but only for the new app. So it's kind of like, well, it can't be the vendor's problem. It must be our problem. Sometimes the integration is assumed to be straightforward because, hey, it's already working on the legacy app, but the reality is sometimes that integration method is not appropriate for the architecture of the new application. So you need to be careful that just because it exists in the legacy app is not necessarily how it needs to be done in your new app, so make sure to not underassess that. So that's where the redesign of integration approaches often come into play. So for example, in the past, maybe it was a data call or integration, and now we need to move it to an API-based integration. That could require kind of different work. Another one that's kind of unique, and actually LG dealt with that, which is third-party apps that actually inject data into the user interface. We've all seen things like Google Maps and YouTube videos and things that are really coming from a third-party source. So if there are any tips, that could create challenges for you if that injected HTML breaks your new design. So talk a little bit about best practices here to avoid some of those challenges. One is certainly you want to determine if your vendors have sandboxes and find that out early in a project. That's going to give you the ability to test in parallel with your live production. Really highly recommend that when you do have an integration, test the integration before you connect your internal application data to it. It's really helpful if you can code up a kind of a sample file or tester file and work through all the kinks of getting your new app connected and know that you've got all of those issues nailed down. So later when you do get an integration, you know for sure that it's more of an internal app issue as opposed to an integration problem. I can't tell you how often on number 3 that we see accounts are set up by developers that are using an actual individual user's account, and everything works great until that user leaves and their account gets disabled by network security, and suddenly all your integrations break. So test your connectivity early, because if you need to have IT do some firewall changes or security changes, that's usually not an overnight process, so you need to give them time to resolve connectivity issues. So really these are things you just don't want to find out kind of late in the project. Watch out for apps that generate HTML. Everybody kind of takes them for granted. I think in LG's case, there was an app that, based on the particular product the user was viewing and their particular location geographically, it would maybe determine what rebates to show on the site. But we found that while that worked great in the legacy application, it broke the data structure or the page structure for the new app, and we needed to have some turnaround time to allow that vendor to update their template. So you need to find those issues early so you can give the vendor time to resolve them. Don't forget to migrate your licenses. It's very common when you have integrations and licenses to have those use trial licenses when you're doing development, but then it's pretty easy to forget to migrate those final licenses, and we've seen many a time where a message shows up in production because of a trial license. And if your vendor doesn't have a sandbox, that doesn't mean don't test it. There are ways to test in production if you need to. You just have to be a little more careful. And, Pooja, I believe the LG project had CRM integration as well as a plugin that directly injected content into your site. Any specific tips you might share from your experience of dealing with external dependencies?
Having different sandboxes for our different integrations definitely helped. And yes, we had to test some things in production because sandbox doesn't really guarantee all kinds of, ease of data integration. So there are things you have to test in production, but sandbox, make sure you always test with a sandbox first.
Okay, thank you. I know we're moving to one that's near and dear to your heart, Pooja. It was a lot of work for you guys, which is the content migration, and this is definitely an area that can lead to a lot of work that isn't necessarily purely technical. So some of the challenges we've seen for clients with content migration, one would be the UX design and mobile responsiveness. It's pretty common by the nature of a legacy integration period that you're probably moving something that's an older application to something new. And one of the things that newer apps really have to deal with more so than older ones is mobile responsiveness and mobile optimization. So there's often this feeling that, yes, we'll just copy and paste all this content from the old site without realizing that you pretty much have to rewrite it all because the HTML doesn't work in a mobile responsive design. So it's very easy to underassess the work it will take to migrate old content. Also, the new application is a different design. There's different features, and so that probably generates holes in the content that need to be filled. And because the technical team usually doesn't write content, they can kind of forget that people need lead times for that sort of thing. So you got to make sure you have an inventory of what content needs to be built and who's going to do it. Last minute design changes. So sometimes when you get content, it's handed to you in formats that doesn't fit the layout that it goes in, but yet that's the content that's been approved by marketing and may actually require you to redesign the page structure to accommodate the content. In some cases, I think requirements around content can kind of be missed because it's assumed to be kind of what you see is what you get. But there are definitely some functional things that go around content like site searching and what expectations do we have, how do we need to tag our content to support that. And then documents are another type of content, and it's really, some people assume that's a copy and paste exercise, but there's also a lot of security concerns around how you're going to render, store that content. So documents also warrant a little bit deeper looking when you have a kind of membership-based application. So to kind of fold that into some of the best practices for content migration, one of those is we highly recommend that you identify a content owner for the project. Somebody who's not necessarily a member of the technical team is pretty common. They may need to broker a lot of approvals for content when it's customer facing. So this may be somebody in marketing or one of the business teams or even sales. Sometimes there is a compliance division that needs to care about these sorts of changes. So you may find there's a much deeper approval tree than you realize. So you just need to handle those sorts of things internally and properly. Evaluate your legacy content for importability. So the sooner you look under the hood to see not only whether you have content to migrate, but more importantly, look at the structure of it and adequately assess how much time it's going to take to truly restructure the content, the better chance that you won't underestimate the effort. I think having a clear content search design and what expectations about what needs to be searched, how you prioritize search results, documents over web, web over documents, these pages over those pages, it's pretty easy to kind of miss some of the nuances there. And then, of course, you need to test those search results to make sure they're actually really valuable for your users. You do need to map your secured content to roles and test that thoroughly. That can be a pretty big deal if you have your content get to the wrong audience, and that's not, it's not really a big functional effort to render a document in a search screen, but you do need to put a lot of test plans in place to make sure that your document security model for the new app is actually working the way it's supposed to. You might also check to see if you have any marketing sharing rules around documents. In LG's situation, we found that after we had done all the work to secure the documents, it turned out there was an email blast that the marketing team was doing to send out, and they needed to put a link to a document. But lo and behold, that link didn't work because we had put all the security around it and didn't know about these special marketing blasts. So check with marketing on any kind of unique rules that go out as part of their marketing automation. Last is to be aware that you need to make your images and video mobile friendly. So there's often an assumption that you just copy and paste your images and video from your current live site. But if that is less mobile friendly than your new site, you suddenly find that you now need to resize all of your images and videos to be more appropriate to smaller screens. So those are some of the best practices we've seen for content migration. Pooja, I'd love to get your thoughts here. I do remember that the LG team made a lot of design and content changes, beyond just straight up migration. So I was kind of curious, what do you think would be required the most effort for you guys? The actual migration of the existing content, or really the effort associated with all of the new content generation and approvals really to keep up with the dev schedule?
While the migration of existing content was challenging, I think content mapping was also a big, huge challenge. We had new content, we had marketing content, and then we also had this responsive deal where all the content had to appear well in all kinds of displays. So having some kind of a scope and a strategy built around content management would be useful.
Thank you for that. I do recall that was just a lot of work that you had to do on the back end to feed us that content we needed. So thank you.
Quite a bit of content.
So user migration does have some challenges, a little more straightforward to kind of talk about, but there are some gotchas you want to be careful of. One is that there's an assumption that you can kind of copy and move your users over, and then it could be a surprise when you realize that the user passwords are encrypted. and cannot be decrypted and thus cannot transfer over to your new application. Even for security compliance reasons, even if you could decrypt them, they might not want to allow that to occur. Also, there could be mismatched security rules. So when you try to move over your users and then you find out that there are some different security rules in the new app that actually causes the user records not to come over. Maybe the password length is different requirements. Perhaps the email is a required field that they're missing in some of the user profiles. So all sorts of things can pop up when you try to do that. Email uniqueness is another issue that pops up here where in the older app we could have two people with the same email or two different accounts, husband and wife could be using the same email, but the new application, the email is the login and has to be unique. Certainly beyond moving users, you also need to map over your roles and permissions, and that may not be a one-to-one mapping. And ultimately these all lead to kind of that last bullet, which is you may find that to do a user migration, it can't be 100% done without the user involvement. There may be actions that a user needs to do related to resetting passwords or updating their account. So leading to some of the best practices here, really, as with others, early evaluation of the user data is huge. It allows you to identify early if you are going to have any issues and allows you to put some mitigation plans in place. Certainly it could even influence the design of some of your roles and permissions. It could require the business teams to remap what this role in the old system needs to map to in the new system before the technologists can get to the work. And then, the biggest thing is it may require you to physically either update data in your legacy system and correct some problematic profiles, or it may imply that you need to have users do something on day of deployment, like reset their passwords or recreate an account. So, and anytime you're going to impact your user base, it's a big deal. A lot of communications need to go out as well as approvals of that. So that's really kind of the gotchas that you want to avoid. And of course, test to make sure that your security is working the way it's supposed to. And Pooja, as I recall, you had to migrate your user accounts from legacy systems, and I feel like maybe the users had to take some action in order to access the new site. So I was curious, could you share what the process was for your users as part of your deployment?
Yes, we actually had the legacy system in action while we were building the new app, and the new system had to basically, we had to make sure that both were in tandem where data and the user data was concerned. So because, users can change their password one day before you go live, and all that has to be synchronized very well. So we had to make sure that we rolled out communications in advance. We gave them enough time to make sure that, hey, the systems will be closed for a couple of days, so please do not change your password, and roll it out in a very easy way for your end user.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a big deal for a lot of folks and the stressful part of the deployment, so thanks for the thoughts there. Then that kind of leads us up to that deployment. The big day is here. So what are some of the challenges that can come up there in the 11th hour? So one is that we've seen folks struggle with is the availability of some of the business subject matter experts to do some UAT. Developers are kind of held to a pretty tight schedule sometimes to get development, but they tend to be very focused on the project and sometimes forget that a lot of the UAT work is done by folks that have their day jobs as well. And so, you need to make sure you're very clear about what time you need. You may need to prepare your timelines appropriately, but make sure that you're accounting for your business teams and what you need from them and their availability, and communicate early. Feature tests in production, kind of we mentioned earlier, there are ways, and sometimes you do need to test certain features in production. So QA and UAT doesn't always do everything you need, so you need to plan for that. And more importantly, since deployments are often done in nights and weekend hours, but yet if there are tests that need to be run in production that aren't purely technical, do you have your business subject matter experts available at the time of deployment? When you have a content-based application that you're moving, SEO can become a really important conversation and something you don't want to put off to the end. You need to properly redirect any URL that was indexed with a search engine in the past inevitably your new app will not have the same URL structures. So that means there's probably a lot of URL redirect. There could be a lot of work to make sure that you've got all of your titles and headers and certain structures that really drive SEO. So there are folks that specialize in that, and you need to get that evaluation done early. And then performance and post-go live are really key as well. Performance really just represents that it could be that you roll out your application and suddenly you find you've got a performance issue. We'll talk a little about that. And then post-go live support, what happens when you have an issue, the day after you go live. So to kind of address some of the best practices, one is we highly recommend creating a pre-UAT checklist, which is actually not just your UAT test plan. It's really more of what all are we going to need from what department and what users in order to successfully do UAT. What's the timeline, what's the commitment, and take that to the stakeholders and get approval and engagement. Highly recommend having that data migration completed before UAT. I've seen a lot of scenarios where the technical team asks the business team to do some testing, but they have just sample data in there, and the business team really gets frustrated because they really want to see real data and look at real records they've worked with. So it's really a much more effective approach to have data migration done before UAT. Obviously getting involvement from the business team for go live, for testing, even if that's nights and weekends, they need to be engaged. It's also very important to remember that cutovers are not instantaneous. So for web applications, for example, business team members aren't always aware that the reality is, due to the way the DNS systems work, you could actually have your legacy system live for some users while other users are hitting your new application. To Pooja's earlier point about users, it applies to everything. So anything that users could do in the legacy application that could cause new data to show up in the database, that could be user passwords, it could be registering as a user, it could be saving a profile, creating a transaction, really anything. You need to lock those features down so that we don't create a scenario where we've got mismatched data after migration. We want to recommend that for your really large and really mission-critical apps that you consider running those apps side by side, meaning that it's not a one-time test and deploy, but there might be a prolonged period of time where you want to be able to run the data in app one over in your legacy app and then see that data flow into your new app and actually kind of test them side by side. And the last is to really know your support plan before you go live as to how you're going to handle issues and requests and questions from your users afterwards. And Pooja, that was actually one I wanted to get your insight on too as well. It's very common. We see a lot of project plans, and it's pretty common to see the very last line says go live with a date on it. And I know that you had to put a lot of energy to worry about what happens after go live and make sure there was support. Could you share a little bit of like who you had ready to support customers after you go live?
Yeah, I wish the go live was the last line, but unfortunately, that's not the last line. Your work begins then. The biggest key here was to have our stakeholder support and their involvement in the whole go live process, because they are your biggest supporters. Everything is not a technical challenger. It's also a business challenge where you need the support of your sales team. You need the support of your internal team members to make sure they can handle your customers and with ease. Knowing what your support plan is, I would really like to talk about that. We had actually had a support plan for at least 3 months till, the chaos or the change is not very acceptable to customers. When you're changing something, you need to support them day in and day out till they get comfortable with, the whole feel of things. So make sure you know how and when you are going to support your customers after the go live date. That requires a lot of planning as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's hugely important and often the area, least planned for in these types of projects. So it's very easy to talk about technical challenges, but there's also some non-technical challenges, and it's good to point those out and share those with teams. And if this was a video instead of a webinar, I think we would see Pooja nodding her head to every one of these. And but one is know your stakeholders and get buy-in early. There's nothing more frustrating, get to the end of the project and you're trying to look for everybody to agree to go live, and then you find out there's a key stakeholder who hasn't been engaged, and they're usually not very cooperative and very happy with you. Another big one is having what we call a scope management plan before UAT. UAT really often is your kind of internal, test bed to make sure everything's working. And what we have often found is that's when you start bringing in some of the day-to-day users of the system who may not have had a voice during some of the design sessions. So they're going to bring in lots of ideas and suggestions, obviously at the 11th hour while you're just trying to get the system live. So we need to, make sure to capture those ideas, but also make sure that we have the support to say, that's great, but probably not going to be in production. So make sure that you have that messaging and support from your management team. Start your content creation early. I think you've heard that as being a theme today, and Pooja can share from a lot of her experience. It just takes time to get agreement on new content, sales, marketing, compliance. Even executives want to have a play in that, so you can't save that till the end. And then kind of echoing Pooja's comment about you really just get started when you go live. It's just remembering you're not done, you're live, and make sure you have that kind of go live plan in place. Pooja, would you agree with all of these? Anything you would change or add from your perspective?
No, this basically covers our non-technical challenges, really.
Okay. And so, Ann, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, great. Thanks there for that. So, Pooja, let's kind of get a little bit into maybe the top challenges that you experienced of why you wanted to go through this update to your new website.
So when we started analyzing what the problem was, we basically had data lying in 5 different places. Sometimes the data was even duplicated 5 times. And this was not an easy way to work with for the internal team members, because we had like a third-party content management system which we couldn't tweak or edit because it was used by other customers as well. So it did not cater to our specific needs, and that was a huge drawback of having no direct access to our data. We also had unconsolidated data. So as I mentioned, there were multiple databases we had to deal with. Sometimes it was just lying in different places. It was multiple duplicated copies of the same thing again and again. So we had to do an intensive data cleanup before we even started the project to make sure we had the number 3 challenge, a single source of truth or a single place, which became Salesforce for our data, where we would only access data from one single source of truth. And this was highly critical because the directions for all internal team members, whether be it at the service department or marketing or sales, we were just looking in different places. And we were procuring data, the same data sometimes, from 5 different places. So we didn't really have our single source of truth, which eventually became Salesforce, because now we just go to one place, we log in, and we access our data right from there. Updating product information also became a challenge because we use different systems. We still use third-party and custom external systems from which we procure different kinds of product data, but it feeds into Salesforce. And now we have some automated processes that are set up, multi-step sometimes, and these feed into our Salesforce database as well. So everything is synchronized so that people go to the same place, find the same data, get the same content, and it's a single unique source of data. This has definitely become much better for our LG customers to access and procure data. Otherwise, they would be going to the sales team. Sales team would be coming to the LG internal team, and it would be like a series of emails that has actually stopped and increased our efficiency, really.
Yeah, Pooja, you kind of parted into how the impact was, where it increased your efficiencies and consolidated your data. Anything about like how it was good for your internal users or anything like that?
Our internal users now can control their own data. So earlier it was a dependency we had on maybe a couple of users or a team, internal team members who would upload this data, and then it was at their mercy that you could control it or not control it, really. But right now we have about 60 contributors or uploaders, or however you may call it, data managers, who manage their own data. So they are responsible for their own data, their management, their maintenance. And Salesforce has really made it very easy for us to control data management in that way. The data organization, we actually went a step ahead with SOLTECH's guidance into managing our product hierarchy and organizing our product data really well. We consolidated some of our duplicate products and made a really robust product hierarchy, which has impacted in a very positive way our web product data, our online product data as well. It's definitely increased the efficiency. What was possible in a week now sometimes gets done in a day, and that really helps or gains confidence for our users to get more done in less amount of time. And everything's now happened because of all our integration and implementation of Salesforce with our external systems. So it has definitely changed our lives in terms of workflows and systems.
That's great, Pooja. I'm so happy that it's made your life a little bit easier. So I do want to thank you for being a part of this webinar and also for being our partner. We do appreciate your business, and we do enjoy still working with you on maintaining this site. So thanks so much for that.
Feelings mutual. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So as you'll see on the screen is a quick poll question before we go into the QA section of the webinar. If you're interested in learning more about how to transform your legacy system, please select one of the options below, and we'll call to set up a free evaluation with you. We'll give you a few seconds to answer that. All righty, so now we'll move on to the Q&A portion. So we have a few questions that came in. The first one being, regarding content migration, what do we need to make images and videos mobile friendly?
Yeah, so the biggest issue with making content, images, and videos mobile friendly is the fact that you don't want to push a high resolution, large image down to a mobile device. It just isn't necessary. You can still have good image quality. So kind of the historical way of doing this was you would identify the various different kind of screen sizes or resolutions that you're designing for, and then you might end up having, say, 4 different copies of the image files at kind of different image sizes to help with performance purposes. So that's one thing you can do is ultimately is resize all your images and then make sure that based on your responsive design, you're grabbing the appropriate one. However, a technique that I much prefer is that we can load up all the original high-resolution images, but instead of referencing direct image tags, you can actually make a reference to a web service and pass into it what image size you're looking for. And then the web service will look to see if we've already cached an image of that size, and if not, it will create an image of that size, return it to the browser, and then go ahead and cache it for future use. The huge advantage in that approach is, of course, that we don't have to do a massive change during the migration, but it is something that gets more and more performant over time as users actually start requesting those image sizes.
Excellent. So we have another question that came in. When you mentioned side-by-side testing as a good idea for large or mission-critical systems, could you provide some further insight into how you would do that?
Sure. So when faced with particularly challenging migrations like large data migrations, or just generally situations that have a lot of data quality corrections, there's always that nervousness that either we haven't corrected something and haven't caught all the issues, or we've done so many transitions of data that we just don't know if it's right or wrong without having somebody spend some time with it. So ultimately, how do you do that, and how can you do it without having to figure it all out during a deployment test? So one of the things that we'll often do in that case is do the data migration with scripting like we talked about earlier, but what we'll do is more of a data sync approach where we're literally copying over a data migration typically nightly or even multiple times a day from the old system to the new system, and then you can literally have the new system running in production, the test system running in your sandbox or staging environment, but the data that they're sharing is near real time. And what that ultimately allows you to do is to have the user do their day-to-day job and then click over into the application and perform a similar operation in your test environment with real live data to see that they both operate the way you expect them to. So it's just a little bit further push to the automated data migration and a little bit different testing approach.
Excellent. And we have time for one last question. You mentioned there are some third-party integration tools. Could you share some examples?
Sure. So some of the ones that we run across with some regularity are tools like Jitterbit, MuleSoft is another one, Talend. Sometimes for kind of smaller live integrations, you could look at a tool like Zapier, which is great if you're looking to move more of a live integration between system A and B. Jitterbit is a good tool for smaller migrations because you can really pay for their licenses on a kind of endpoint basis, which could be a pretty small number of endpoints if you're just moving from one database to another or one API to another. For larger enterprise solutions, they may look at something a little bit more enterprise-friendly like MuleSoft, so there's a lot out there. Another one that actually has an open source free license is Talend. So if it's a smaller migration but you still could benefit from some automation, Talend might be a good place to start as well.
Excellent. Again, thank you everybody for joining. If you were joined late or perhaps you missed portions of the webinar, we will be sending out the recording in a few days so that you can watch this again on demand. Thank you again for joining and have a wonderful day.